The plates were already on the floor before Margaret even understood what was happening. Her daughter was standing in the middle of the kitchen, the same kitchen Margaret had cooked 1,000 meals in, the same kitchen where she had made school lunches and birthday cakes and late-night grilled cheese sandwiches for 3 children who were now adults, and her daughter was shaking, not with sadness, with fury. Her son was pacing behind her, his phone out, the screen turned toward Margaret's face like it was evidence at a trial. And her youngest, her baby, the one who never raised her voice, was sitting at the table with her hands flat on the surface, pressing down like she was trying to stop herself from standing up and screaming. There were newspapers, 4 of them, spread across the table like someone had laid out a crime scene. And in the center of all of it, Margaret, still, quiet, her coffee mug in her hand, steam rising from it. Completely forgotten, she was looking at a photograph. It was on the front page of the 3rd newspaper, the one her son had slapped down hardest. The man in the photograph was wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than Margaret's car. He was walking out of a building that had his name on it, his name in letters 10 feet tall, carved into steel and glass. His jaw was set, his eyes were forward. There were other men in suits around him, but they all seemed to be orbiting him the way planets orbit a sun. He looked powerful. He looked untouchable. He looked exactly like the man who had stood next to Margaret every Sunday for 7 months, elbow deep in soapy dishwater, washing soup bowls for strangers. Her daughter said something. Margaret didn't hear it. She was still looking at the photograph, because she had never, not once, seen him in a suit. She had only ever seen him in a plain gray T-shirt with a small bleach stain near the collar. She had only ever seen him laugh at her terrible jokes about the coffee being so bad it could strip paint. She had only ever seen him careful, gentle, quiet, and she had made herself a promise, a stubborn, foolish, wonderful promise, that she would never ask. Her son said her name, Margaret, and she finally looked up, and the expression on her face, not shock, not guilt, not embarrassment. The expression on her face was something none of her 3 children had seen in years. It was the expression of a woman who had been, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely, completely, terrifyingly alive. And she did not look sorry about it, not even a little bit. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone you love, someone who needs to believe that it is never, ever too late. And drop a comment below. Tell me what you think is going to happen. Tell me if you have ever kept a promise like Margaret's. Tell me if you have ever loved someone without needing to know everything about them first. Because that is what this story is really about. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Margaret and Calloway had been a wife for 31 years. She had been a mother for 28. She had been a daughter, a sister, a neighbor, a friend, a room parent, a carpool driver, a Sunday school teacher, a bake sale organizer, a PTA treasurer, a hospital volunteer, and a woman who always remembered everyone's birthday with a real card, not a text, a real card with a stamp. She had been so many things for so many people for so long that when her husband Robert died on a Tuesday morning in March, quietly in his sleep, the way the doctor said was peaceful but felt to Margaret like a betrayal because she had been right there and she hadn't known. She sat in the hospital room for 2 hours before the nurse came back in, not because she was in shock, because she genuinely did not know who she was without him. That thought frightened her more than the grief did. The grief came in waves. Everyone said it would. Everyone was right. It came at strange times. In the cereal aisle, because Robert had been particular about cereal. In the parking lot of the hardware store, because he used to hold her hand in parking lots even after 30 years. Even when they were just running in for light bulbs. In the middle of the night, when she reached across the bed and the cold of the empty sheet hit her hand like a door slamming. The grief she understood. The grief had a shape. What scared her was the silence underneath the grief. The long, flat, featureless quiet of a life that had been built entirely around other people, and now had almost no one left inside it. Her children were grown. Her daughter, Claire, lived 40 minutes away with her husband and 2 kids. Her older son, Patrick, lived in another state with a job that required him to work 60 hours a week and apologize for it constantly. Her youngest, Emma, was 24 and kind and busy and trying to build her own life, as young people should. They called, they visited, they loved her, but they had their own orbits now. And Margaret was standing on a planet that had gone very, very quiet. The house still smelled like Robert sometimes. She would walk to the hallway and catch it just a trace, and stand very still, as though moving would scatter it. She kept his reading glasses on a nightstand. She did not know why. She knew he did not need them anymore, but she liked seeing them there when she woke up. She told no one this. She was not a dramatic woman. She had never required drama. She had required purpose, warmth, usefulness. The sense that her presence in a room made that room function better. That had always been enough. More than enough. It had been everything. And now she woke up each morning in a house that functioned perfectly well without her doing anything at all. She had tried a book club. The books were fine. The women were fine. But they mostly wanted to talk about their grandchildren. And Margaret did not yet have grandchildren. And she spent 3 meetings smiling at the right moments and feeling like a ghost. She had tried a painting class at the community center. She was terrible at painting. Her instructor, a gentle man who was very committed to finding something encouraging to say about every piece, had looked at her watercolor landscape and said that it had tremendous energy. Margaret had known then that she was not a painter. She had tried walking every morning at 6. This she kept. The walking helped. The cold air in the dark and the sound of her own footsteps on the sidewalk, it helped. But it was not enough. She needed to be useful. That was the word. Useful. It sat in her chest like a splinter. Small. Constant. She had spent 30 years being so useful that she had never really examined the feeling. It had just been the water she swam in. And now the water was gone and she was sitting on dry ground, wondering why breathing fell harder than it used to. It was her neighbor Dolores who mentioned the soup kitchen. Dolores was 73, sharp as a tack, had survived 2 husbands and a kitchen fire, and still grew the best tomatoes on the block. She mentioned it the way she mentioned everything, casually over the fence, while she was hanging laundry even though she had a perfectly good dryer. She said there was a place called Harvest Table over on Clement Street. Said they always needed volunteers on Sundays. Said the director was a woman named Barbara who had the energy of 6 people and the patience of a saint, and the coffee was genuinely terrible, but the work made you feel like you had done something real with your hands. Margaret said she would think about it. She thought about it for 3 weeks. Then one Sunday in September she put on jeans and a blue sweater and drove to Clement Street. Harvest Table was not impressive to look at. It occupied the ground floor of a building that had been a hardware store, then a furniture outlet, then a church that ran out of congregation. The sign above the door was hand-painted. The tables inside were the folding kind, the ones with the metal legs that pinch your fingers if you are not careful. The chairs were mismatched. The lights were fluorescent, and they buzzed very slightly, a sound you stopped hearing after a few minutes but could not unhear once you noticed it. It was warm, though. That was the first thing Margaret noticed. It was genuinely, deeply warm, and it smelled like chicken broth and baked bread and dish soap and coffee, the coffee already smelling slightly burned, which turned out to be its natural state. Barbara was exactly as Dolores had described. She was a woman of perhaps 65 who moved through that kitchen like she had been born moving, like stillness was something that happened to other people. She had short silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she shook Margaret's hand and said welcome and meant it completely. She told Margaret they served lunch every Sunday from 11 to 2. She told her the regulars, the guests, she called them always guests, never anything else, came from all over. Some were homeless. Some were just alone. Some were working families who had fallen behind and needed one solid meal a week while they got back on their feet. She said the rule in that room was dignity. Always. No exceptions. Margaret said she understood. Barbara put her on the serving line. For the first Sunday, Margaret stood behind a long aluminum tray of chicken and rice and handed plate after plate to the stream of people who came through, and she said thank you and smiled and meant it. And by the time they were done and the last guests had been served and the folding tables needed to be wiped down, something had shifted in her chest. Small, quiet, but real. She drove home and made herself a salad and sat at the kitchen table and did not feel like a ghost. She went back the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. By the fourth Sunday, she knew most of the regulars by name. She knew that a man named Gerald always wanted extra bread and would say, "God bless you," 3 times in a row if you gave it to him. She knew that a woman named Vera came in at exactly 11:15 and sat at the same table and always saved a seat for someone who never came, but she saved it anyway, and you did not ask about it. She knew that the teenagers who volunteered from the local church were sweet, but confused about where to put the clean serving spoons and needed gentle reminding every week. She knew that the coffee was made in a machine that Barbara had owned since roughly 1987, and that no amount of good intentions was going to make it taste like anything other than hot disappointment. She knew all of this. What she did not know, could not have known, on that fourth Sunday in October, when she arrived 15 minutes early and let herself into the side door, was that there would be a man standing at the industrial sink. He was washing dishes. Not the dishes from the current service. Those hadn't started yet. He was washing the coffee cups from the previous evening, a community AA meeting that used the space on Saturday nights. A stack of mismatched mugs, some of them chipped, and he was washing them one at a time. Carefully, the way you wash things when you're not in a hurry and you've decided that whatever you're doing is worth doing properly. His back was to her. She noticed his height first. He was tall, not aggressively so, but the kind of tall that fills a space naturally. His hair was dark, a little long, not styled, the kind of hair that looked like he'd run a hand through it and called it done. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt and dark jeans, and there was an apron tied around his waist. He had rolled his sleeves up to the elbows. He had not heard her come in. She also noticed, in the careful, sideways way that she was noticing all things about him, that no one else seemed to know much about him either. The other volunteers treated him with the kind of easy familiarity that comes from repetition. But when she listened, really listened, the conversations never went anywhere personal. They talked about the work, about the guests, about Barbara's running battle with the coffee machine. They did not talk about where Cole worked or where he lived or where he came from. It was as if he had arrived in this kitchen fully formed on a Sunday, and the Sundays were all anyone had of him. She understood this perfectly. She was not sure what that said about her. The first real conversation happened on a Sunday in late November. It was a cold day, not cold enough to be dramatic, just cold enough to matter, and the guest count was higher than usual. People who might have managed fine in October were beginning to need things they had been able to do without a month ago. The service ran long. Cleanup ran long. By the time the last chair was folded and the last tray was scrubbed, it was past 3 o'clock. Most of the volunteers had gone. Margaret was mopping the floor near the door because Barbara's back was bothering her, and Margaret had told her to sit down in a tone that apparently recalled whatever authority Barbara had once had a mother, because she sat. Cole was in the back, finishing the last of the pots. It was quiet. The fluorescent light buzzed. The mop made its wet sound across the tile. Then Cole came out of the back with his jacket. Just a plain dark jacket, the kind you find at any store in any city. And he was going to say goodbye. She could see the goodbye forming, the slight adjustment in his posture. That meant he was wrapping up. And she said, again, without quite planning it, she said, did he want terrible coffee before he left? Because she was going to make one more cup whether he said yes or no, and it seemed wasteful to make terrible coffee for only one person. He paused. Then he said that was the most convincing argument for terrible coffee he had ever heard, and he stayed. They sat at one of the folding tables, the room empty, the chairs all stacked along the wall, Barbara dozing slightly in a corner with her reading glasses still on, the light still buzzing above them, and they drank their terrible coffee and they talked. They talked for a long time. She learned that he liked to read, that he thought most movies made silence feel like a problem to be solved, when actually silence was often the most interesting part, that he had not grown up with money. She would remember this detail later, sharpen it against everything she would eventually know, turn it over and over. He said it plainly, without drama or pride or performance. He said he grew up in a house where you counted things. And then he stopped, not as if he was hiding something, but as if that was the part of the story that was over and not the part worth dwelling on. She told him about Robert. Not everything, just enough. She said she had been married for 31 years, and her husband had been a good man, and he was gone now, and the house was very quiet. He did not rush to fill the quiet after she said this. He let it sit, Then he said that sounded like a specific kind of hard. She said yes. That was exactly the word. Specific. He said he thought the hardest losses were the ones where you lost not just a person, but the version of yourself that existed with them. She looked at him. She said that was the most accurate thing anyone had said to her in 2 years. He said he was glad it landed right. She said, how did he know that? And he looked at his coffee cup, and then at the table, and then, for just a moment, at something that was not in the room at all. Something far away and internal, and not for her. Not yet. And he said he supposed he understood loss from the inside. She did not ask. He did not explain. They finished their coffee. They put the cups in the sink. They walked out into the cold afternoon and went their separate ways. In her car, with the heater starting to work and the radio on low, Margaret sat for a moment before she put in drive. Her heart was doing something she had not felt it do in a very long time. Something quiet and stubborn and frightening and entirely against her better judgment. She drove home. She did not say anything to anyone. December arrived. The soup kitchen did extra work in December. Additional drives, toy collections for children and guests, a Christmas lunch that Barbara spent 4 weeks planning with the focus intensity of a military operation. Everyone volunteered extra hours. Margaret volunteered extra hours. So did Cole. They fell into something that neither of them named and both of them knew. It was not dramatic. It did not look like what the movies would show you. There were no significant glances across a candlelit room, no moments where the music swelled and their eyes met through a crowd. It was quieter than that. It was the way he handed her a tray when her hands were full, without her having to ask. The way she saved him a cup of coffee during the lull and set it on the corner of the table where he always stood. The way they debated, with complete seriousness and genuine disagreement, whether the bread was better with the soup or better held until after. The way he laughed at her jokes, every single time, with that real laugh that she had started to feel responsible for, like she was tending something. It was the accumulation of Sundays. One thing began to needle at Margaret, not painfully, but the way a question does when you are trying very hard not to ask it. She didn't know anything about his life outside of this room. She knew what he was like. She knew how he treated people, how he listened, how he showed up, how he laughed. She knew what he thought about silence in movies and the particular agony of a bad cup of coffee, and the way he held a plate out to a guest with both hands, steady and unhurried, as if the person receiving it deserved that steadiness. She knew him, but she did not know anything about the structure of his days from Monday to Saturday, where he went, what he did, who he was to the rest of the world. She told herself this was fine. She told herself she was a 58-year-old widow who came to a soup kitchen on Sundays, and whatever was happening here was small and Sunday-sized, and she was not going to make it into something that required answers. She made herself a promise. She would not ask. She stood there for a moment, just a moment, and she was not sure why. There was nothing remarkable about a man washing dishes. She had seen it 10,000 times. But there was something about the way he was doing it, something unhurried and unpretentious and genuinely concentrated. Like those coffee cups were the most important things in the room, and he was honored to be trusted with them. She must have made a sound, her keys maybe, or her shoes on the floor, because he turned. Margaret had been married for 31 years. She was 58 years old. She had not looked at a man the way the women in movies looked at men in a very, very long time. She was not prepared. There was no gentle way to say this, no modest way, no appropriate way for a 58-year-old widow standing in a soup kitchen at 9:45 on a Sunday morning. He was extraordinarily handsome, not in a polished, practiced way, not the way men were handsome in advertisements, in the way that good bones and honest eyes and a face that had been lived and come together, and make something that you notice all the way down to your shoes. His eyes were a very dark shade of something she couldn't quite name in that light. His jaw was strong without being harsh. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow that she would not notice until weeks later. He looked perhaps 40, perhaps 45. She could not tell exactly and did not look long enough to count. She looked away. She said good morning. He said good morning back. His voice was quiet, low, the kind of voice that didn't fill a room, just settled into it. He said he was sorry. He hadn't heard anyone come in. She said that was fine. She was early. He said he was always early. She said she was starting to be the same way. He smiled, just slightly, and went back to the dishes. Margaret put on her apron and went to help Barbara with the bread. She did not look at him again. Or rather, she made a point of not looking at him again, which was its own kind of looking. His name was Cole. She learned this from Barbara, who mentioned it the way you mention someone who has been there long enough that they don't need introduction, just reference. Barbara said Cole usually handled the back, dishes, cleanup, whatever needed doing that no one else wanted. Said he'd been coming for about a year. Said he was quiet, but good. Said that when something broke, he fixed it, and when something ran out, he restocked it without being asked, and when they were short-handed, he stayed late. Margaret said he seemed nice. Barbara gave her a look that was almost a smile and said she supposed he was. Margaret did not ask anything else. This was partly because she was a woman who had learned to read rooms, and the look Barbara gave her said there might be more to say, but this was not the moment to say it, and partly because, and this she would not admit to herself until much later, she found that she liked not knowing. There was something restful about it. She had spent so many years managing information about everyone around her, schedules, needs, preferences, histories, sensitivities, that there is something almost luxurious about simply being in the presence of someone and knowing only their first name and the fact that they wash dishes carefully. The Sundays settled into a rhythm. Margaret on the serving line, Cole in the back, and then, she was not sure exactly when it started, the coffee, it was during the lull. Every Sunday between about 1 and 1:30, after the main rush of guests had been served and before the cleanup began in earnest, there was a lull. The volunteers would drift toward the small folding table in the corner, where Barbara kept the coffee machine and the box of mismatched mugs. You poured yourself a cup. You stood or sat for 10 minutes. You breathed. The first time Cole appeared at the coffee table during the lull, Margaret was already there, leaning against the wall, holding her cup in both hands, watching the room. He poured himself a cup. He took a sip. His face did something complicated. She said, and she did not know why she said it. It just came out. She said it tasted like someone had burned the coffee and then apologized for coffee and then burned it again. And he laughed, not politely, not socially. He actually laughed. A real, sudden, surprised sound like he hadn't been expecting it and couldn't help it. She felt it in her chest the way you feel a door open in a house you thought had no more doors. She was very careful not to show this. She sipped her terrible coffee, and they stood there in a lull and talked. Not about anything heavy, nothing personal. About whether the bread that week was better than last week. It was about a particular guest who had come in that day with a small dog tucked inside his coat, and Barbara's heroic attempt to pretend she had not noticed. About whether the buzzing from the overhead light was getting worse, or whether they were just noticing it more. It lasted 12 minutes. Then cleanup started, and they both went back to work. But the following Sunday, the lull arrived, and Cole appeared at the coffee table and poured 2 cups and handed one to her without asking. She accepted it without comment, and they talked for 14 minutes. This became the thing. Weeks passed. The weather changed. The trees outside dropped everything they'd been carrying, and the city got that dry, gray quality it has in November when the warmth is gone, but the cold hasn't fully committed yet. Margaret noticed small things. She noticed that Cole never checked his phone during the service. Not once. She had seen volunteers half his age who checked their phones between every interaction. Cole's phone, if he even had one on him, never appeared. He was fully, completely present, always, in the back with the dishes, in the lull with the coffee, helping an elderly guest find a seat. He was there, all the way there. She noticed that he knew the regulars. Not in the way that someone who shows up once a week might know them, with a general nod and a vague name memory. He knew them specifically. He knew Gerald's preference for extra bread without being told. He knew that Vera sat at the corner table, and you did not move the chair. She saved even when the room was full. He knew that a young man named Daniel, who had started showing up in October, had a bad knee, and you should always put his food on the side of the table nearest the door, so he didn't have to carry the tray as far. He had paid attention. Genuinely. Over time. She found this remarkable. Not because she didn't want to know, but because she liked this thing too much to put on a scale. Because the moment you start asking about the outside life, the job, the money, the status, the context, you stop seeing the person and start seeing the data. And Cole, as she knew him on Sundays, was not data. He was the most real thing in her week. She would not ruin that. She kept her promise. Christmas came. The Christmas lunch at Harvest Table was, by any reasonable measure, a small miracle. Barbara had obtained a donated turkey, actually 8 donated turkeys from a grocery chain. The church volunteers brought sides. A local bakery sent pies. Someone had strung lights along the windows, and someone else had put a small artificial tree in the corner with paper ornaments made by school children from a neighborhood. The room was full, every table occupied. The noise level was warm and alive, not chaotic, not overwhelming, but real. The kind of noise that comes from people who needed somewhere warm and human, and were genuinely glad to have found it. Margaret worked the serving line for 2 hours straight. Her feet ached. Her back made a comment around the 90-minute mark. She ignored both. In the lull. What passed for a lull on this particular Sunday? She found Cole at the coffee table, and he handed her a cup, and she drank it without even wincing at the taste, which was how she knew she was tired. He said she looked like she had run a marathon. She said she felt like she had run too. He said she looked happy, though she thought about this. She said yes. She said she was. She said she couldn't remember the last time she had been in a room this full of people, and felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. He said he knew the feeling, the way he said it, quietly, with something careful and wistful underneath the words, made her look at him, really look, in a way she tried not to do too often, because when she did she found it difficult to look away. She said, and she was not sure why she said this. The tiredness perhaps had lowered her guard. She said it must be strange for him, coming here every Sunday, and not being anyone. He went very still. She said she didn't mean it the way it sounded. She said she meant that he didn't seem to talk about his outside life, which was fine. She added quickly, she didn't talk about hers much either. That was not the point. He said what was the point. She said she just wondered sometimes if this place, these Sundays, were as different from the rest of his week as they were from the rest of hers. He looked at his coffee cup for a long moment. He said yes. Just yes. No elaboration. No color or detail or story. But the way he said it, with a weight that suggested the distance between his Sundays and his weeks was not measured in miles, but in something else entirely, landed in her chest and stayed there. She did not ask. She kept her promise. Then she said she was going to get more bread. Did he want some? And he said yes, and they went back into the warmth of the room, and the afternoon carried on. On Christmas Eve, a bouquet of white flowers arrived at her door. No card. She stood on her porch in the cold, holding the flowers for a long time. She told Claire, when she called on Christmas morning, that a neighbor must have left them. She was not sure why she said that. She was not sure it was a lie, technically. She was only sure that there was something about those flowers that belonged to her in a way that did not require explaining to anyone else. She put them in Robert's side of the sink, the vase that had been his mother's. They lasted 2 weeks. January, February. The cold deepened, and then the cold began to ease, and the light changed its character. The particular shift that comes in late February when the sun stays a few minutes longer each day, and you begin, cautiously, to believe in spring again. The Sundays accumulated. Something was happening between Margaret and Cole that was undeniable and unnamed and mutual and terrifying. It was not that they had said anything dramatic. They had not. Their conversations were still conducted in the medium of small, warm, careful things. Books, coffee, the guests they had both come to know so well. Margaret's children. She talked about them in the general way, the proud and worried and sometimes baffled way that parents talk about adult children. Cole listened to all of it with the focused attention she had come to understand was simply who he was. He did not half listen. He did not offer quick reassurances. He listened, and then he said something that showed he had actually processed what she said, turned it over, thought about it, which was rarer than it should have been. But there were moments. There was a Sunday in January when she slipped on the wet floor near the industrial sink. Just a slip, not a fall. She caught herself on the counter, and his hand was on her arm before she had finished catching herself. Fast. Sure. His hand was warm through her sleeve. He held her arm for just a second, made sure she was steady, then let go. The whole thing lasted 3 seconds. She thought about it for 4 days. There was a Sunday in February when they were the last two cleaning up again. This happened with increasing frequency, though neither of them planned it, or perhaps they each planned it and pretended not to, and they were walking to their cars in the parking lot. And the cold had a particular blue quality in the early evening light, and he said her name. He said Margaret. Just that. Her name. But he said it the way you say something you've been saying privately for a while, and this is the first time you've let it out. She turned. He said he just wanted to say that Sundays were his favorite day of the week. She said that was a very kind thing to say about a day that involved washing other people's dishes. He said that was exactly what he meant. She got in her car. She sat for a long time. Her daughter, Claire, noticed first. Claire was sharp. She had always been the one who noticed things, the one who cataloged expressions and measured tone and drew conclusions from data points that most people missed. She had made a career of it. She was, in fact, very good at her job. She noticed in March, when she came over for dinner, and watched her mother move around the kitchen. Not what her mother was doing, how she was doing it. There was a quality to it, a lightness, a kind of internal weather that had changed. The kitchen felt different. Her mother felt different. Claire said, "Mom, you seem different." Margaret said she was fine. How did she want her steak? Claire said she wasn't talking about fine. She was talking about different. Those were not the same thing. Margaret said medium well. Claire let it go, for the moment, but she watched. She mentioned it to Patrick on the phone 2 days later. Patrick, being a practical man, said Mom is probably just getting into a good routine. The volunteering has clearly been good for her. Let's not project. Claire said she wasn't projecting. She was observing. Patrick said there was sometimes a difference, and she might be confusing them. They agreed to disagree. Emma, who visited 2 weeks later on a random Wednesday because Emma moved through life with the beautiful unpredictability of someone who had not yet calcified into schedule, sat with her mother over lunch and said, "Mom, who are you thinking about?" Margaret said, "What a peculiar thing to say." Emma said, "You have the face you have when you are thinking about someone specific." Margaret said that was not a face. Emma said it absolutely was a face. She said she had seen it exactly twice in her life. Once when her mother was waiting for her father to come home from the hospital after a procedure, and once when their neighbor's cat had gone missing, and her mother was quietly but completely convinced it was going to come back. Margaret said she did not have a face. Emma said okay. They ate their sandwiches. Emma, before she left, hugged her mother for a long time, long enough that Margaret pressed her face into her youngest daughter's shoulder and breathed. Emma said whatever it is, she hoped it was good. Margaret said she thought it might be. Emma said good. She said her mother deserved good. She drove away, and Margaret stood on the porch and watched until the car was gone, and the street was quiet, and the afternoon light was long and gold on the pavement. It was a Sunday in March when the thing between them finally, undeniably crested. The service had been long. A new wave of guests. A family of 4, parents young and exhausted and trying so hard not to look desperate, had come in and sat together at a corner table, and the smallest child, a girl of maybe 5, had fallen asleep with her head on the table before she even finished eating. Margaret had brought an extra blanket from the supply closet, without being asked, and laid it over the child gently, and the mother had looked at her with an expression that had no words in any language. Margaret had smiled. The mother had looked away fast, pressing her lips together. Cole had seen this. She had not known he was watching, but later she would know, because of what he said. After cleanup at the coffee table, during what had become their ritual, 2 terrible cups, the room emptying around them, he said she was extraordinary. She said that was a dramatic word for putting a blanket on a sleeping child. He said it wasn't the blanket. He said it was the fact that she'd seen what the mother needed, which was not pity, not fuss, not attention, just a blanket appearing as if it had always been coming. And she had given that without making the mother ask for it or receive it consciously or feel diminished by needing it. He said that required seeing people, really seeing them, and most people didn't. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said he saw people too. She said she had watched him for months, and there was not a single guest in that room he hadn't learned something real about. He looked at her. She said she meant it. He said he had had good teachers. She said who? He said some of them were in this room right now. The fluorescent light buzzed. Barbara had already left. The last of the church volunteers had packed up 15 minutes ago. It was just the two of them and the empty room and the terrible coffee and the last gray light of a March afternoon coming through the windows. He said Margaret. She said yes. He said he wanted to tell her something. Something shifted in the room. In the air itself. She said okay. He said he wanted to tell her that this Sundays here, this room, this coffee, this... He stopped, tried again. He said she needed to know that this had become the most important part of his week, possibly the most important thing in his life. And he had a life, he said carefully, that had many large and important things in it. And this was still the one that mattered most. She was very still. He said he knew that was an unexpected thing to say. She said it wasn't entirely unexpected. He said he wasn't sure what to do with that. He said his situation was complicated. He said there were things she didn't know about him, things that had nothing to do with who he was in this room but would change how she saw him, and he said he needed her to know that this room, what they were in this room, was real, was the most real thing he had. She said she understood. He said he wasn't sure she did. She said she thought she did. She said she had spent 31 years being a wife and a mother, and she had loved every day of it, and she did not regret 1 minute of it. But she had also spent most of those years being the context around other people's stories, the steady background, the warm center that everyone orbited and no one ever really looked at directly. She said she was not complaining. She was explaining. She said that when she came here on Sundays and stood behind the serving line, and when she stood at this table with a cup of the worst coffee in the continental United States, she was not the background of anything. She was just herself, and she was seen. She said she was not ready to put a name on what this was, but she was not going to pretend it wasn't anything either. He said her name again, Margaret, quietly. She said yes. He said, may I? And she said yes. She didn't even wait to hear the end of the sentence. She just said yes. He stepped forward, and he put his hand against her face, one hand just the side of his hand against her cheek, and he looked at her the way no one had looked at her in so long that the looking was almost enough by itself. And then he kissed her, not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies with the camera sweeping and the music building. He kissed her the way the rest of him was, carefully, truly, with complete attention. She kissed him back. The fluorescent light buzzed. The room smelled like dish soap and burned coffee and bread. When she opened her eyes, he was still right there, still close, and his expression was something between relief and terror, which she found improbably deeply funny, and she laughed. He looked startled. She said sorry. She said she didn't mean... She said it wasn't bad funny, it was just that she had been 58 years old for 7 months, and she had not expected to feel this particular way at 58. He said, what way? She said like someone who had just found something she had stopped looking for. He smiled. She looked at that smile and thought, I do not know what you do for a living. I do not know how you spend Monday through Saturday. I do not know what your life looks like outside of this room. And for the first time she felt that promise, her promise not to ask, as something more complex than restfulness, as something with an edge. But she had made it, and she kept it. April came. What followed was the sweetest, most disorienting, most quietly extraordinary period of Margaret Calloway's life in 2 years. It was still Sundays. They had not graduated from Sundays, had not moved into the rest of the week, exchanged phone numbers in a way that phone numbers imply availability, made plans that required calendars. It was still the rhythm of the kitchen, and the lull, and the terrible coffee, and now, at the end of it, walking to the parking lot side by side. But between the walk and the goodbye, there was something new. A few minutes at the cars. Sometimes longer. They stood in the parking lot under the flat April sky and talked about everything and nothing, and he made her laugh, and she said things she had not said to another person in years, and he listened and responded, and was present in a way that was so complete it sometimes felt like a physical weight she was leaning against. He held her hand in the parking lot once. Just her hand, his hand around hers, standing still. They were not walking anywhere. They were just standing. She thought about Robert holding her hand in parking lots. She thought, I thought that part of my life was over. She thought, I was wrong. She drove home on those Sundays with the radio off, in a silence that was nothing like the silence in the house. This silence had a shape. This silence was full. She told no one, not because she was ashamed, but because some things need tending before they need showing. Some things grow better in privacy. She told Emma, just Emma. Emma sat on the phone and was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Oh, Mom," and the way she said it, not with concern, not with alarm, just with soft and wondering warmth, was the best possible response, and Margaret was glad she had told her. Emma asked what his name was. Margaret said Cole. Emma asked what he did, and Margaret said, and this was the first time she had said it out loud, she said she didn't know. She said she had made herself a promise not to ask. Emma was quiet again. Then Emma said that was either very wise or very dangerous. Margaret said she thought it might be both. Emma said she trusted her mother. She said if her mother looked at someone like that, the face, she said, the specific face, then that someone was worth looking at. Margaret said she didn't have a face. Emma said she absolutely did. The second Sunday in May, the day that the crack appeared. It was a small thing, small enough that Margaret almost missed it. Almost. A man came in for the service. Not a regular guest, not a volunteer, someone she had never seen before. He was perhaps 60, well dressed in the casual way of someone who wore good clothes unconsciously, the way people do when they have always had them. He came in, and he looked around the room in the particular way that people look around rooms when they're looking for someone specific and are trying to seem like they are not. His eyes found Cole. Something moved across his face. She did not have a word for it exactly. Recognition plus something else. Relief plus something else. He took out his phone and stepped back toward the door and spoke quickly and quietly into it and left. Cole had been in the back. He had not seen the man. And this thought arrived quietly and sat down and refused to leave. He had seen him, and the being in the back was not coincidence. Margaret told herself she was imagining things. She almost believed it. 3 Sundays later, a woman came in. Younger, perhaps 30. Impeccably put together in the way of someone who came from a particular world. And the way she stood with her weight back on her heels and her chin up a half-inch told you something about what world that was. She was not there for the meal. She came in, stood near the door, took a photograph with her phone of the room, seemingly, and left. Margaret watched Cole during this. He was at the coffee table. During the lull, his back was partly to the door. His posture had changed, just slightly, just enough that if you had been watching him every Sunday for 7 months you would notice it. His shoulders carried something for a few seconds that they didn't usually carry. A tension, a wariness. Then it was gone. He turned. He saw Margaret watching him. His face opened back into itself. He brought her a cup of coffee. She took it. She did not say anything about the woman. He did not mention her either. But Margaret, lying in bed that night, stared at the ceiling for a long time. She told herself she had made a promise. She told herself she was keeping it. She told herself she trusted him. All 3 of these things were true. And still, under them, something had begun to move. The first Sunday in June. Harvest table was quieter than usual. A small service. The summer months always thinned the volunteer ranks as families went on vacation, and some of the regular guests dispersed in the better weather. Barbara was grateful for the quieter pace. Her back had been worse. Margaret and Cole stayed late. They sat at the folding table, the same table where they had sat on that cold November afternoon. And they were not talking for a while, just sitting, comfortable in the silence, the way you are only comfortable with someone once you have accumulated enough time with them to stop needing to fill it. He said he wanted to ask her something. She said okay. He said, carefully, in the way he was always careful with things that mattered. He said he wanted to spend time with her outside of Sundays. The room was very quiet except for the buzzing light. She looked at him. He said he knew what that meant. He said he knew that would require, and here he paused, choosing words, it would require him to show her more of his life, things that would change the picture. And he needed her to know, before she heard anything or saw anything or anyone said anything to her, that what was between them was the truest thing he had. He needed her to know that whatever else was true about him was secondary to this. She was quiet for a long moment. She said she had kept a promise for 7 months. She said she had done it on purpose, deliberately, because she believed that what you are in a room says more about you than what you do outside it. She said she had learned more about who he was from 7 months of Sundays than she had learned about some people in years. She said she would meet him. She would meet the rest of his life. He said she might need some time. She said she'd had years of time. She thought she was ready. He almost smiled. Almost. But there was something behind it that wasn't quite humor. He said okay. He said he would call her. She said he didn't have her number. He said he would like her number. She gave it to him. He gave her his. She looked at it, the number in her phone, and she thought, I have had this man's name for 7 months, and now I have a number. I still don't know what he does. She kept her promise. She did not ask. He called on Wednesday. His voice on the phone was the same as in the kitchen. Quiet, settled, entirely present. She liked it in the phone in a different way than she liked in the room. More private, like being let into a smaller space. They talked for an hour. He asked about her week. She told him about Claire's visit and the book club she was still mildly failing at, and the fact that a family of birds had apparently decided to nest in her gutters, and she had not yet decided how to feel about this. She said yes. He said, I imagine you've seen the papers. She said yes. He said, I'm sorry. She said, which part? He said, all of it. He said the way it came out. He said he had wanted to tell her himself. He said his plan, had been the following Sunday. He said he had spent 3 weeks figuring out how to say it. He said Richard's showing up had been the thing he had been most afraid of, and he had still not been fast enough to stop it. She said, why did you wait this long? He was quiet. He said because he had never been more terrified of losing something than he was of losing this. He said he had spent years, in rooms full of people who wanted things from him or wanted to be seen next to him or wanted a piece of what he built. He said he had been lonely in the most crowded rooms of his life. He said the first Sunday he walked into Harvest Table, he had been a man who needed, desperately, to exist somewhere that had nothing to do with the name on his buildings. He said he had found that, and then he had found her. He said the longer the Sundays went on, the more the thought of telling her felt like reaching into something perfect and cracking it. She said that was a little arrogant. He said he knew. She said he should have trusted her sooner. He said yes. He said he was sorry. She said was Cole even his name? He said yes. He said his full name was Coleman. He said everyone had always called him Cole. He said that was real. She said okay. He said okay? She said she hadn't said she wasn't angry. She said she was. She said there was a difference between a privacy that was restful and a privacy that was strategic, and she thought he knew the line and had sat on the wrong side of it. He said yes. She said but. He said but. She said she had made a promise. She said she had kept it for 7 months, not because she was uninterested, but because she believed something about him that his tax returns and his press coverage could not prove or disprove. And she still believed it. He was very quiet. He said what did she believe? She said she believed he was the man who washed dishes carefully. That was the man she knew. That was the man she had feelings for. The buildings were news to her. The man was not. He said her name. He said it quietly. He said it the way he said it in the parking lot when it was not going anywhere. It was just her name. Just her. Just that. She said she needed time. He said of course. She said she needed to process what her children had said. She needed to think about what it meant to step into a life that was nothing like hers. She needed to be honest about whether she was strong enough for the version of him that existed outside of Sundays. He said he understood. She said she wasn't saying no. He said he heard her. She said she was saying give me time. He said he would give her anything she needed. She said she hoped that was true. He said it was. She said good night. He said good night, Margaret. The weeks that followed were not easy. 3 things happened that were not easy. The first was the press. Somehow, she suspected the woman with the phone who had appeared at the soup kitchen in May, though she could never confirm it. Word got out that Coleman Whitmore had been spending Sundays at a soup kitchen on Clement Street, and that there was a woman. The stories were not cruel. They were worse than cruel. They were curious. They were warm-toned and speculative, and completely outside the boundary of anything she had agreed to. She found herself on a website, photographed from the parking lot, walking to her car. She was turned slightly away. She looked tired. The caption said widow, volunteer, Whitmore's mystery companion. She stared at that photograph for a long time. She did not feel she was looking at herself. The second thing was her children. Claire came over 3 more times in 2 weeks. Each time she was calmer, more careful, more composed, which Margaret knew meant she had been thinking, not that she had resolved. On the 3rd visit, Claire sat down and said, Mom, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know it's coming from love. Margaret said, okay. Claire said, did Margaret think she was confusing gratitude for being seen with something deeper? She said, grief did strange things. She said the first person who made you feel real again could seem more significant than they were. Margaret looked at her daughter. She said she had thought about that. She had thought about it seriously and without self-deception. She said grief did strange things. She agreed, but she said she was not a 25-year-old who had never been in love. She said she knew the difference between the relief of being seen and the specific weight of feeling something real for a specific person. She said she was sure. Claire said okay. She said she just needed to hear it. Margaret said she knew. She said thank you. The 3rd thing was that she went to harvest table the following Sunday, and Cole was not there. She served the line. She had her terrible coffee. She helped with cleanup. Barbara did not mention it. The other volunteers did not mention it. Gerald wanted extra bread, and she gave him 3 pieces, and he said, God bless you 3 times, and she smiled. She did not know whether Cole had stayed away for her sake, to give her the space she asked for. She told herself this was what she wanted. She drove home in the silence that was not full anymore. The Sunday after that, he was there. He was at the sink when she came in. Same gray T-shirt, same apron, same steady way of washing things. He turned when he heard her. He said good morning. She said good morning. And they went to work. The service ran. The guests came through. Gerald got his bread. Vera held her corner. The light buzzed. In the low, she was at the coffee table. She poured 2 cups. She put one on the corner where he always stood. He appeared. He saw the cup. He picked it up. He stood next to her. They looked at the room. She said she had been thinking. He said him too. She said she was not interested in his money. She meant that exactly the way it sounded, and also in a much more specific way. She meant that his money was not a reason to be with him, and it was also not a reason to run from him. She said it was simply a fact about his life the way the bad coffee was a fact about this kitchen, and she had learned to work around the bad coffee. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. She said she was going to need certain things. She said she was not a woman who needed a palace. She said she was not going to change who she was or how she lived because of who he was. She said she was going to keep coming to this kitchen every Sunday and washing the serving trays and having terrible coffee during the lull. And if he wanted to be here for that, she was glad. And if his world made that difficult, he was going to have to figure out how to manage his world. He said he could figure that out. She said she wasn't done. He said sorry. She said she also needed honesty going forward. She said she understood privacy. She had operated in privacy herself for 7 months. She said she respected the choice he had made about his Sundays. But she said she was not equipped for strategic. She said if something was happening in his life that was going to affect what was between them, she needed to know. He said he would tell her. She said she needed to know she wasn't going to be a Sunday. She said she was not 16. She did not intend to be kept in a particular box and taken out on the appropriate day. He said he understood. She said she hoped so. She turned and looked at him directly, the way she had learned to do, the full look, the one she had been careful about for 7 months. He looked back. He said Margaret. She said yes. He said she was the most serious and most wonderful woman he had met in his entire adult life. She said he should see her when she was really trying. He laughed. The real laugh. The sudden, surprise, genuine one that she had spent 7 months tending. It hit her in the chest like it always did. She looked away. She sipped her coffee. She said it was still terrible. He said it was still perfect. What happened next was slow. Not in a bad way. In the way of things built well. He came to her house on a Saturday. The first Saturday. The Saturday that meant this had outgrown Sundays. And he rang the doorbell, and she opened the door, and he was standing on her porch in a plain dark jacket. And he had brought food from a place she had never heard of, but which turned out to be extraordinary. And they sat at her kitchen table and ate and talked for 4 hours. He looked at her kitchen, The small things, the specific accumulated detail of a life. And she watched him looking and saw that he was memorizing it. The reading glasses on the counter, the bird calendar on the wall, the coffee maker that was better than harvest tables, which was not saying much. He saw Robert's reading glasses on the nightstand when she showed him the house. He did not look away from them or pretend he hadn't seen them. He said he was glad she kept them. She said she wasn't sure why she did. He said he was. She said why. He said because it said something about how she loved. That she didn't put things away just because they were hard. She had not expected that. He had not said it to be impressive. He had said it the way he said things. Directly, having thought about them, meaning them, she said thank you. He said he meant it. The world was not always kind about them. There were stories, not as many as she had feared, because Coleman, was practiced at a particular kind of carefully managed privacy, and the people around him were good at it too. But enough. A small photograph, an item in a column, a moment where they were walking in a neighborhood she liked because it had bookstores and good bread, and someone stopped in a way that was just slightly deliberate. She did not enjoy this. She told him so. He said he was sorry. He said it was the part of his life he genuinely hated. He said he had spent years designing his existence to minimize exactly this, and it had been imperfect. She said she wasn't asking for a solution. He said he knew. She said she just needed to understand that it was real for her. The photograph of her walking to her car. The caption, "Widow, mystery companion." He said, "I know," and his jaw had gone slightly tight in the way it did when he was holding something he did not intend to drop in public. She said, "What does your name on a building feel like?" He looked at her. He said it felt like a reminder of something he was not sure he had chosen correctly. She said, "What do you mean?" He said he had built things. He had built enormous things. He had created something that employed thousands of people and generated wealth on a scale that was... He stopped. He said he was not going to perform modesty. He said it was big. He knew it was big. He had wanted it to be big once. She said once. He said somewhere along the way. He was not sure exactly when. He had looked up from the building and the name and the meetings and the decisions and the rooms full of people who agreed with him, and he had realized he had no idea who was in his life because of who he was and who was there because of what he had. He said that was the loneliest thought he had ever had. She said, "So you went to wash dishes?" He said yes. She said, and no one there cared about Coleman James Whitmore. He said Barbara had offered him a mop and asked if he needed help reading the instructions. Margaret laughed. He said he had been back every Sunday since. She said she knew. He said he had not known it would lead to anything. He had genuinely not planned for her. She was not part of a plan. She said she was glad. He said her? She said she was glad she was not a plan. She said she was 58 years old, and she was a widow, and she had 3 grown children, and a bird in her gutters, and she was still figuring out what the next chapter looked like. She said she did not have the energy for being part of a plan. He said she was the one unpredicted thing in years. She said she would take that. May the following year. 13 months since that first Sunday. Margaret still came every Sunday. Cole still came every Sunday. He still washed dishes. She still worked the serving line. They still had their terrible coffee during the lull. Gerald still got extra bread. Vera still held her corner table. Some things had changed. He had met Claire. She says, "Cole." He says yes. She says, "Thank you for washing the dishes." He laughs. The real laugh. She smiles. Outside the window, the late afternoon light is long and golden on the street. Summer is starting. The birds in her gutters have hatched their eggs. She checked last week, and the small sounds in the morning have become part of the texture of her mornings in a way she has decided to keep. She sips her coffee. It is terrible. She does not mind at all. But here's the thing about a life that has started moving again. It does not stop moving at convenient places. It does not give you the clean ending, the bow, the moment where you can say, here, this is where the story lands. 2 weeks after that Sunday, the Golden Light Sunday, the thank you for washing the dishes Sunday, Margaret gets a phone call. Not from Cole, from Richard. Cole's Richard, the man in the good suit. He says he is sorry to call her directly. He says Cole asked him not to, but there is a situation, and he believes she needs to know because Cole is not going to tell her himself because Cole is, And here Richard pauses, because Cole is in a hospital. Margaret is standing in her kitchen, holding the phone. She says which one. Richard says he is sorry. He says Cole had collapsed during a meeting 3 days ago. He says it was his heart. He says it is not. He stops. He says Cole is stable. He says he did not want her to read it in a newspaper first. He says, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Calloway. I think he was going to tell you himself when he was stronger, but he has been asking for you. Every day. He hasn't said it, but he looks at the door." Margaret says she will be there in 20 minutes. Richard says it is in a different city. Cole had been traveling. He gives her the hospital name. She says she will book a flight. He says there is a car waiting if she wants it. She says she does not want his car. She books her own flight. She calls Emma on the way to the airport. Emma says, "Do you want to come?" Margaret says not yet. She says she will call. Emma says, "Mom." Margaret says yes. Emma says, "You told me once it might be wise or dangerous." Margaret says she said it might be both. Emma says yeah. She says go. The hospital room is quiet. He is awake when she gets there. He is pale and there are monitors, and he looks smaller than he does in the kitchen, which she had not thought was possible because he had never seemed large in the way people describe powerful men as large. But now he seems reduced, human, which is its own kind of large. He sees her. He says, "Margaret." She says yes. She sits in a chair beside the bed. She says, "You should have told me." He says, "I didn't want to be that." She says, "What?" He says, "Someone you had to take care of." He says he had watched her take care of people her whole life, and he did not want to be one of the things she had to manage. She looks at him for a moment. She says that is the most foolish thing he has ever said to her. He almost smiles. She says love is not a transaction. She says she was not going to love him when he was well and quietly excuse herself when he was difficult. She says that was not the thing she had built over 31 years, and it was not the thing she was building now. He says he knows. She says, "Does he?" He says he is learning. She says, "Good." She takes his hand. The monitors beep softly. The room is quiet. She says she needs to tell him something. He says, "Okay." She says she had kept a promise for 7 months. She says she had never asked. He says he knows. She says she is going to ask now. He says, "Okay." She says, "Is he going to be all right?" He holds her hand more firmly. He says yes. She says, "Is he sure?" He says the doctors say yes, and he intends to agree with them. She says that is a very specific kind of answer. He says he is a very specific kind of man. She says she knows. She says good. She says he should sleep. He says don't leave. She says she won't. She doesn't. She sits in a chair through the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. She reads a book she brought. She drinks the hospital coffee, which is almost as bad as harvest tables. She thinks about this. She thinks about the particular way life has of presenting the things you need in the places you are not looking. She thinks about a Sunday morning in September when she was early and a man was washing cups at a sink and she heard her own keys and he turned. She thinks about promise-keeping as an act of faith. She thinks, "I did not plan for this. Neither did he. We were both just there." She thinks that might be the only honest beginning anything has ever had. When he wakes at around 9, he finds her still in the chair, and he says he is sorry for putting her through this. She says don't apologize for being human. He says she is extraordinary. She says she knows. He laughs. Quietly. The real laugh. Even here. She thinks, "I will tend that laugh for as long as I am given." She puts her book down. She says, "Cole." He says yes. She says next Sunday when you are back on your feet and recovered and cleared by your doctors. He says yes. She says she wants 2 cups of terrible coffee and a folding chair and no press and no Richard and no buildings with his name on them. He says yes. She says just them. Just that room. Just that? He says yes. She says good. She picks her book back up. He watches her read. The monitors beep. The room is quiet. 3 weeks later. On a Sunday morning, the side door harvest table on Clement Street opens at 9:45, 15 minutes before anyone else arrives. The fluorescent light buzzes on. The room smells like dish soap and burned coffee and bread. At the sink, the industrial sink, the deep one with the long spray handle, a man in a plain gray T-shirt rolls up his sleeves to the elbows. He turns on the water. He begins to wash dishes. A woman comes in through the side door. She hears her keys. He turns. She says good morning. He says good morning back. His voice is quiet, low, the kind of voice that doesn't fill a room, just settles into it. She says she is glad he is here. He says him too. She puts on her apron. She fills the coffee machine. Outside, the June morning light is coming in through the windows. The day has barely started. There is so much still to come. And that is where this story lives. Not in the ending, not in the resolution, but in the next Sunday, and the one after that, and the one after that. Because that is what love looks like when it arrives a second time, not as a grand entrance, not as a rescue, not as a transformation. It arrives as Sunday, as a folding chair, as a cup of coffee that is genuinely, stubbornly, magnificently terrible, as someone turning around when they hear you come in, and saying good morning, and meaning it with everything they have. Margaret Calloway did not go to Harvest Table on Clement Street looking for love. She went because she needed to be useful, and she still is, every Sunday. If this story moved you, if you felt something in your chest during Margaret's parking lot evenings and Cole's folding chair confessions and the fluorescent light that just kept buzzing through all of it, please share it with one person today, one person who needs to hear that it is never too late, that the best things still come in through side doors in plain gray t-shirts, with soapy hands and real laughs. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story. And drop a comment below right now. Tell me what hit you hardest. Tell me your favorite part. Tell me if you believe in Sundays. Because I'll tell you something. I do.